Okay, so feel free to interrupt with questions. I put quite a few tips and tricks on there. We probably won't get through them all, which is fine. I'll ask Carolina to share the slides afterwards so you can see all of them. I sort of wanted to start with 4 key tips, okay? They would kind of say, a lot of these are broader than NSF, but we're going to kind of focus on NSF here. The first one is read the solicitation. The second one is communicate with a program officer. The third one is remember you're advertising yourself in addition to your project. And then finally we'll talk about making it clear how you can kind of have good organization and why that matters in your proposal.
So, but when you say communicate with the program officer, who is the program officer? Like, you mean NSF?
Yeah, the NSF program officer.
Okay.
So, I wanted to start by talking about read the solicitation. And the first question sometimes people have is, what's a solicitation? And that's because not all NSF programs actually have a solicitation with them. So, an example of one that has a solicitation Okay, so the Strengthening Americans Infrastructure is just kind of one that I picked. If you scroll down here on the right, this is kind of the information bar. But if there is a solicitation, there'll be a button here to read the solicitation. This one, the Science of Learning and Augmented Intelligence. This is an example of one that does not have a solicitation, where you scroll down on the right and there's no button there. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about the differences there. Okay, but when it comes to the ones with the solicitation, if you open it up, this brings the program solicitation. It is very long, okay? But this is all of the details of this program that NSF wants to have. Now, a lot of these are kind of standard language, and as you go through, you'll be like, oh yeah, that, and that. This award administration information, for the most part, at the proposal stage, you don't need to worry about this, because this is about how the award is going to be administered if you get it. Now, if you have some sort of complicated situation, like international partners or something, and you want to know some details about if I receive this grant, can I actually do with it what I want to do, you may need to go through this bit here. But for the most part, this bit you can kind of avoid a little bit. Okay? And the first thing that I always tell people to look at is the program description.
So when you say international partners, do you mean people who are not on a visa, who are on a visa and because I'm on a visa and I'm working with Jamie. So do you mean someone like me as well, or is it?
No, I have in mind if you want to try and have an international sub-awardee, or if you have a collaborator in China, a country of interest, a country that's on some of the government lists, and you kind of have a nuts and bolts question about what are the rules that are going to apply to using this money. Okay. Some of that might be in the program description. I have no idea why the screen just went black. Some of that might be up in the program description, but really, for the most part, that stuff is stuff that I tell people, unless you've got some weird thing that you want to do with the money that's not exactly normal for the sort of research that NSF does, out of the many, many parts of this solicitation, that's not where you kind of want to focus your attention. Areas to focus your attention, especially the program description, and then also kind of program description, and then the proposal preparation instructions. Okay, so let's look at the program description. Okay, and what's the important information here? Okay, so can read this. Okay. Going through here, okay, you can see that's a little bit long, okay. but this tells you what they're looking for. Okay. And so I'm going to pull out here some of the things that I found when I was looking through that program description. Okay. So sentences that I found in there: submitted projects must be organized around social, behavioral, or economic science concepts. Proposals must also bring relevant expertise in the focal infrastructure itself, which is likely to be in one or more research areas, and then they list the other NSF directorates. You have to substantially improve, strengthen, and transform the design, development, use, deployment, cost effectiveness, sustainability, and maintenance of American infrastructure. Should deal with the implementation of infrastructure, including basic understandings of barriers to equitable participation, uneven social impacts, open access to information data, health disparities, and other human and social dimensions. So from that information, what do you see about what they're looking for in this program?
Too much information.
So I tried to condense it down. Okay. So one of the first things I see looking at this program description is it's looking for a collaboration. Okay. You should probably have someone in the social, behavioral, economic sciences, so someone with a background in social science, and someone else in the other research directorates. So that's things like engineering, computer and information science, biology, chemistry. So if someone said, I'm interested in going after this grant, one of my first questions for them is going to be, it looks like they're looking for a collaboration. Which of those sides are you on, and do you have someone in mind for the other side? Okay. And that's something that extracts out the program description. So if you're just coming in saying, well, I'm an engineer, I've got a better mechanical engineer, I've got a better design for a bridge, okay, say, that's great. How's that organized around social, behavioral, or economic science concepts? Okay. Similarly, in terms of that partnership, it's kind of, these are the two sides here. This is kind of something having to do with design, development, use, deployment, cost effectiveness, sustainability. This is kind of the more traditional sciencey side. Not entirely cost effectiveness, can be economics.
Yeah.
And then down here we really see social side. Okay. So if you're just saying, I've got a better design for a bridge, and I think that fits here, you say, okay, tell me how you're addressing this.
So can I read this as, so perhaps if I only have an idea of a better design of the bridge, probably I would say it's less of a fit, because to me it feels like maybe this grant wants you to develop more of the collaboration side, and the hardcore, hard science maybe a little bit less in the proposal. The priority, is that sounds right about this?
So I think the question is, if you've designed a better bridge, what do you want to do with it? If you're like, I just want to focus on bridge design, then this probably isn't such a great fit. But if you're telling me, well, it's a better design for a bridge because it uses less material, it's going to be more cost effective to build, then I'm going to say, okay, are you interested in partnering with someone from economics to kind of develop that side of the proposal? And so whether or not it's a good fit kind of depends on the researcher's goals and aims. But it is telling me about what they're looking for in that program description in a way that if you just look at the title about American infrastructure, you might not just get that looking at the title and the kind of short summary that shows up on the NSF page. Does that sort of make sense? So the program description really kind of helps you understand what are they looking for and whether it matches what you want to do. Okay. And this is kind of what I've said about what I get out of that bit of the program description. The other thing to look at in there is the proposal components, especially when you're like, you know what, I think this is a good fit for what I want to do. Going in there, the project description must include the following separate sections, each clearly labeled with the headings used below. focal infrastructure, integrative research, access and inclusion, stakeholder engagement. Okay. So first of all, you better put that in. You know, if you don't have those sections, it's just going to turn around and be rejected. But also, even this can tell you a little bit about what they're looking for. Okay. So by looking at the headings that they want, what does that tell you?
Those are the keywords?
Yeah, those are the keywords. Anything about the project, what they're looking for in your project?
Oh.
How you should structure it, maybe?
You better have some community engagement and argue that how this is not just a better design, as in better in science, but how people can actually use it, and like sort of like a broader impact maybe.
Yeah, so the broader impacts, it tells you about the broader impacts that they're looking for. Definitely should have the social and behavioral and economic science part. This is kind of pointing at different areas that they want you to hit, you know, the access and inclusion bit, the stakeholder engagement, you know. And like I said, if there's no solicitation in there, then the project description that's on the web page. So let me go out of here. If we go back to this one that doesn't have a solicitation here, usually this synopsis over here is longer. So you can see this one has a longer synopsis than the one that does have the project description. Okay, they're the full solicitation, I'm sorry. So, short synopsis. If there is no solicitation, make sure to read the synopsis, because that's kind of all you've got. I would say if there's no solicitation, it's especially important to reach out to the program officer, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So let me just start with questions about the solicitation tip.
Sometimes I find the solicitation very long,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
include many information. Like there are instructions how to fill out the forms. So like I tend to, like I get it. Like I need to read very carefully. But I guess when I read it, I actually have some kind of priority, and there are sections I probably only look at once. Is that? Do you still suggest to read page, front to the back? And
No, and that's a great question. That was what I was trying to get at by saying you can kind of ignore this stuff at first, unless you've got some weird situation going on. I always say read the program description very, very first, okay? And decide if it's a good fit. And then kind of start structuring your program. Do I need partners? If I need partners, we're happy to help you find them if you don't have them in mind, that sort of thing. And then once you decide that, okay, and you might need to look at the eligibility information. Maybe you're not sure if you're eligible if it's some sort of early career thing or some sort of limited thing. Then once you start getting into kind of the yes, I think I've got a project idea, yes, I think it's a good fit, then I would start looking at the award information that kind of tells you usually the maximum amount in there. If it's not there, it might be in the budgetary information. And the proposal preparation instructions, okay? So, but those I kind of wouldn't bother reading through until you kind of have read the program description and think that you have a good project, good idea for it. Okay. And then this proposal preparation and submission instructions, the big one to pay attention to is A and B. Okay. Due dates are usually on the front page as well. You want to know the due dates, but that's not going to be one you're flipping back to frequently. The research.gov, grants.gov requirements, that's something for sponsored programs to worry about. If you find yourself reading those, you should be in touch with sponsored programs.
What do you mean by sponsored program?
The Office of Sponsored Programs here at JMU.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So when you want to submit to NSF or any federal funder, you're not the one that clicks the submit button. It has to be the authorized organizational representative. and those folks are in sponsored programs. So you prepare it, you hand it over to the Office of Sponsored Programs, ideally 5 business days in advance, and they are the ones who put it together and submit it.
And this is for all of the grants, like not just NSF?
Anything that requires an authorized organizational representative. So it would be all federal grants and then some of the private funders as well when it's submitted. Because they're the ones saying JMU stands behind what is in this grant. They're friendly, wonderful people. They're down the hall from me. Very nice folks. And they work very hard with everyone to make sure that things get put together. They especially help with budgets because there's all sorts of issues of complying with NSF rules, with state rules, with JMU rules. You know, you want to hire someone, how much do you have to budget for their health insurance? You know, they're the ones who know that so that you're not floating adrift trying to come up with a number.
Every funder kind of has their own rules for the budget. It might be a different format depending on who put out the solicitation. And so there's a specific format required for an NSF grant that sponsored programs can help you with.
Yeah, so I actually would not recommend reading it cover to cover unless you need to fall asleep. I would recommend identifying, start with the program description, think about it a little bit more, and then from there move to kind of the proposal preparation, the budget, the award information. And then kind of as you need the other pieces.
I guess another question is, let's say the program description. Sometimes my feeling is that, what I've observed is different people reading the same program description will have different interpretation and have their own kind of also different interpretation and different priority on how this proposal should look like, right? I guess, do you have any suggestions on developing a robust or a consensus on the interpretation?
Wonderful. That's my next thing.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, so you've read the program description, you have an idea that you think fits, maybe you're talking to a partner, maybe they have the same idea, similar idea, different idea. You guys both read the project description or program description, and you're saying, I think they want a cat, and they're saying, I think they want a dog. Okay? So what do you do then? Communicate with a program officer. Okay? This is something that can be really scary, intimidating, but it's a key step to making sure you're using your time well. Okay? So program officers, who are they and what do they do? So their goal is to ensure high quality and on-topic grant submissions. Okay? They generally don't evaluate the grants themselves, the proposals themselves, but their goal is to kind of help people make sure it's a good fit, their project's a good fit, and put together high-quality proposals. Okay? So, things they do. Okay, they typically answer questions about the grant program and the solicitation. So if you have a question where you're staring at the solicitation and saying, what does this mean? Or what's the goal of this requirement? What are they trying to do with this? Those are entirely appropriate questions to send to a program officer. Okay? Because they understand the program. They usually help develop the current solicitation, and so they know why that's in there. They know what that means. They know what the program is looking for there. They typically can give limited feedback on proposal ideas. Certainly they can answer questions like, is this idea suitable for this program? And I think that's especially key for interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary programs where you may be trying to interpret things that are outside of your area of expertise. These bottom 3 things have been a little bit hit or miss in my interaction with program officers. Some of them are very open with this information. Some of them are kind of a little bit more by the books sort of thing. They may have information about program priorities. They may have identified issues that your idea they don't look through the full proposal, 15-page narrative, but they may have issues that, and we'll talk about how you communicate with them in a minute, but they might flag something as like, you really haven't addressed this in our conversation and you might want to think about this. I had a pre-proposal that I sent and they were like, we've seen a lot of things getting turned down for not addressing sustainability, how you're going to continue it after the funding ends. And we really think that you need to think about highlighting and answering that question a little bit more. They may give general suggestions on timeline or budget. They may say things like, I had someone say, you're putting in 5 years here, but it looks like years 4 and 5 are just continuing what you did in year 3, and that's not something that I think they're going to look positively on. You can't rely on that, but sometimes they will. Okay? So that's the sort of suggestions that they may give. What are things that they don't do? Okay? They don't decide if you get funded. At the NSF, it's review panels that kind of evaluate your proposal. So if you're writing to the program officer saying, can you tell me if you think this is going to get funded? The answer is no, they can't tell you. And so they're not going to tell you if you're likely to get funded. They're not the ones that decide, really, if you get funded. Okay? They kind of move some money around. They might decide how much. Okay? They also don't edit or provide detailed feedback. Okay? So don't send them your 15-page project narrative and say, can you tell me what's wrong with this? Okay? Or can you give suggestions on this? They don't edit and they don't kind of go through and give detailed feedback. That's kind of at a much higher level, any feedback that they give.
Are program officers the one who wrote the solicitation?
It varies a little bit by NSF, but they're usually involved in the process.
Okay.
I don't know the details. There are former NSF program officers here. Both Steve Whitmire and Mindy Capaldi in CSM are former program officers, as is Ravi Shankar in math and stats. So if you want to know kind of the internal details, but I know most program officers are involved in that in some way. Okay, so what does it look like to communicate with a program officer? NSF is very nice. Most programs or divisions actually hold online virtual office hours. I strongly recommend those. If it's a program that lives in a division or a directorate that doesn't hold office hours, email is another option, okay? Do not recommend cold calling. Okay, that's usually not the best way to actually get useful conversations with a program officer. As you probably know, if someone just randomly cold calls your office. So the ones who hold office hours, they kind of have a structure where there's generally an open session for general questions. And that's the avenue for like, hey, I don't understand what this means in the solicitation, or can you clarify what the priority is here? Those sorts of things that you don't mind asking in front of everyone. A lot of them also have breakout rooms for discussing specific ideas. Okay, so if you want to be like, hey, we have this idea that I don't know if it fits, can I talk to a program officer kind of more one-on-one? A lot of them will have breakout rooms. Not quite all of them, especially if it's a very big, very popular program, but a lot of them do have those sort of breakout rooms for going in, meeting with the program officer. It can be you and your team. So I've done this with NSF Granted, where there were like 3 of us on the team working on the grant. We're kind of like, okay, the 3 of us are on a team, can we be in one breakout room with a program officer? Is that? What if it's not holding office hours? Okay. Email. The key thing with email is brief and focused. Okay. So I would not try to explain your project in the email. I would attach a 1-page description of your project. So think pre-proposal. What's the big idea of your project? In your email, definitely state what grant you're asking about. Okay, I'm contacting you about the Building American Infrastructure or whatever grant. And then be clear what you're asking for and why you're reaching out. Don't just be like, I've got this idea for this funding opportunity. Say, can you tell me whether this is a good fit? Can you tell me if this is within the grant's remit? Or you could just be reaching out with technical questions. And the key thing is make sure they know how to get back in touch with you. Okay? So provide your contact info and available times. Especially, I have heard that in terms of responding to kind of your one-page description of your project, because of FOIA concerns, a lot of program officers would prefer to do that over the phone versus in a written email. So if you say, you can reply to this email, but I'm also available at this phone number on Friday from 1 to 4 this week and next week, or something like that. That would be ideal, so they have the option to call you back, or schedule a Zoom meeting or whatever.
What is the concern? FOIA concern?
Freedom of Information Act, people can request emails and government contacts for, from government employees. There are, as state employees, we are also covered under FOIA, but there is a procedure for lawyers to determine that something can't be released. So when it comes to communicating with program officers, okay, as with professors, usefulness of office hours can vary. I know you guys are wonderful folks. I'm sure your office hours are exceedingly useful with your students. But if you put on your student hat for a moment and remember your days as a student, some professors were probably really helpful in their office hours, and some professors, at least in my experience, were a little bit less helpful in their office hours. You have the same experience with the NSF. Some program officers are exceedingly helpful. Some other ones, I'll just be honest, are less so. Even given that, I always say at least contact them and make sure your grant is in the remit. And this intimidates people, it kind of scares people. The worst they can say is, no, it's not. That's not saying your idea is bad. That's not saying you shouldn't do this research. It's just saying, don't waste your time writing a proposal because it's not what we're looking for to fund. And that's a type of success, because you're not wasting all that time writing a proposal. And so I always say, if nothing else, reach out and make sure that before you spend all this time writing 15 pages, which is basically a paper, that it's something that isn't going to be immediately thrown out as not relevant to what they're looking for. Does that answer your question about what happens if you think they're asking for one thing and someone else thinks they're asking for another?
Yes. Now, to come back at you, I would say every time, so that's, I guess the two things are related. Like personally, I actually did this, like I tried to call them on the phone, and because I get immediate answer. And also like every time when I have, let's say, different opinions on the interpretation of a proposal with my partners, and I feel like writing the email kind of extend the timeline, and around that time I don't know what to do. So I guess the two things together, like yes, I did call them and trying to have an answer, and the program officer was nice enough to tell me that okay, this is the direction you have to go. But I also understand the kind of comparison between okay, some might prefer call, some might prefer email. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So and obviously, if you're on a short timeline, can bend or break some of these rules, but kind of. Our recommendation is generally to do it by email, especially if you're sending a one-pager and asking, is this in remit?
Yep.
If you're asking for an interpretation question, okay, you might be able to catch them at a good time. But if you're saying, hey, I've got this idea, can you tell me if it fits? That's something that's definitely better done by email.
Right, exactly.
And hopefully you're not on such a short time scale. Did you have something you like to say?
No.
Okay. Other questions, comments for the good of the order? Okay, so those are kind of more having to do with the steps of writing or something. This is a little bit more about the content, okay? So I think this is especially important for researchers at R2. To remember that you're advertising not just your project idea and why it's a great research thing to do, but you're also advertising yourself. So you want to convince the reviewer that your project is interesting and worth doing and that they should fund it. But you also need to convince them that you are the right person to do this project. Okay. And I think there's some more questions about that for researchers applying from an R2 because you've got a higher teaching load, you don't have as many resources, typically you don't have grad students in your labs, and so there's a little bit of a question, unfairly I think, but there's more of a question in the researcher's mind of, okay, this is a great project, but is this person the right one to do it? Okay? And so I would say that that's probably something that you want to be thinking about when you get into the nuts and bolts of writing it. Don't just focus on advertising the project, advertise yourself. And so what can that look like? A few things I would recommend. If you've got preliminary data, or you can get preliminary data, use it, highlight it, put it in. And even if it's not in the form of preliminary data, showing that you've done prior work, that you have the particular skills to do this research. Okay? Don't be shy about using I, you know. And then something I think that has come up is we have wonderful undergrad students here. And there's maybe a bias sometimes with some of these funding programs of saying, can undergrads really do that work? And we know the answer here is yes. Show that. Show the past success that you've done with your undergrad workers, if you have them, undergrad students in your lab. Because the best way of answering the question, can undergrad students do that, is to say yes, and they have, you know, with me, if you can, you know. Here's preliminary data that I took with my students to kind of emphasize. That's assuming that you're using undergraduate students in your project. If you're not, then this is less of a concern. But to kind of emphasize that you can do that research here, and that you are the person with the skills, the background, the knowledge, and the expertise to do that work. Having said that, also don't be afraid of collaborations, you know. If you're trying to advertise yourself and you're realizing it's a stretch, see if you can find a collaborator, okay? If you're looking for someone else at JMU, or even external to JMU, my office helps to find collaborators, especially if it's in another college or outside of JMU. We scramble, we see if we can find someone. So if you are the engineer who can build a better bridge, and you're saying, but I don't know anything about economics, contact my office and we'll go to the College of Business, we'll go into the economics department and say, who wants to partner here? Who wants to work with this person?
Can you elaborate on the second particular skills you've developed? What are the skills you're mentioning?
Depends on the project.
Sure.
You know, so coming from my own research background, if I was doing a proposal having to do with my background area, I would point out that I am a member of the only group that has been using this particular mathematical tool, the Mellon-Barnes formalism, in these types of calculations. You know, and that's why I'm the right person for this. That would look different for different projects, but don't be shy about your previous work, skills that you've developed. You know, if you're an experimentalist, what skills do you have? So making the case, not just I've published A, B, and C, but by doing the work for A, B, and C, I've acquired these skills.
I'm actually concerned about, like, what if you don't have any experience working with undergrads? Because, like, undergrads, I mean, if I have to work with undergrads, that means ideally I should be able to pay them. But if I don't have a grant, like, you know, it's like chicken and egg problem.
Right. So one way of getting around the chicken and egg problem is, of course, independent study, building a research portfolio where students get paid in coursework, you know, as opposed to dollars and cents. That may or may not work for you. I think if you don't have that, that's okay. You want to show that you have a plan for how you're going to mentor them, that sort of thing, and recognize that there's going to be questions there about what sort of work can be done with undergraduates. and think about how you will answer that. And that could be that you're going to have a longer timeline, that's going to be maybe a discussion of mentorship and training. You know, so you might say, I'm going to do this sort of training with my students, you know, and that's how I'm going to bring them up. I saw a proposal that came in this past fall where they were actually had an external partner at a national lab, and the students were going to spend some time getting trained at the national lab before doing similar work here. Think outside the box there. But I think it's, and you know, people get funded without, you know, this question doesn't automatically sink, you know. But it's a question to have in mind when you're writing that the reviewers on the panel might very well be asking, especially if it's something aggressive. So we all know there's some research that, you know, undergraduates are well positioned to do. There's some research that might be a little bit aggressive for undergraduates to do.
I'm interested on your thoughts. So I'm all for like the argument that we should advertise ourselves and advertise, you know, the unique place and tell them, you know, the particular skills. Sometimes, or maybe I don't know. I'm afraid that sometimes it might backfire, especially, for example, you know, talking about the teaching load or being R2. Or actually, your example, you know, brought a lot of, inspired me thinking about, okay, actually, I'm involved in certain techniques that are unique, that are, you know, a very close group. I have concerns that might backfire in some way when it appears to the reviewers.
So I think it's in wording. I would never recommend kind of flagging, oh, I'm going to have trouble because, okay? You know, that,
Okay, I see what you mean.
you know, I think you can say something about like, you don't necessarily have to flag the limitations. You know, you don't have to say, well, because I don't have graduate students here, I'm going to use undergrads, and here's how I'm going to handle it. Like, you don't want to start from a position of weakness, okay? I would say someone who's paying attention knows you're at R2 already, and someone who's not might just be like, huh, they're using undergrads. That's interesting, I would have done that with grad students. Well, they've got a good plan, okay. You know, something like that. So I wouldn't necessarily highlight any limitations from that. I know with the teaching load, there's a variety of opinions about whether or not to mention that. And that's almost a personal style and almost writing style opinion, because it does impact often the timeline, you know, that you're not going to work as quickly as someone at Berkeley because you've got a higher teaching load. And so some people do think that it's appropriate to mention that when talking about the timeline, like, you know, because of my teaching load, I'm going to accomplish X, Y, and Z over this year and A, B, and C in year 2. I don't have opinions with that. I don't think there is one answer to that. For some reviewers, it'll probably be a negative. For other reviewers, it might be like, oh yeah, they do have a high teaching load. But they're still the right person for this. I know that was a dodge.
Oh, no, I mean, thanks for sharing it, that's, yeah.
You know, I do think pay attention to how you're writing it, you know, and I wouldn't start from a place of weakness. If you feel the need to bring it up, kind of bring it up as a like, oh, here's something that you might think, but here's how I'm addressing it. You know, the same way you might about like, I don't know, you're doing some sort of astronomy thing and it's cloudy for the entire month. You know, like what are you going to do if you don't get the full observing time that you want? Or, you know, try and approach it like that if you're going to address it explicitly.
Thank you.
Other. Okay, and then the last major tip that I kind of had was making it clear, good organization. So we have this idea that everyone's going to sit down, read the proposal, think about it carefully in one go, and that's often not quite what it looks like. One of the tips I have at the end is it is so enlightening to serve on a review panel to kind of see how this works. Your proposal will typically be read by about 3 people, each of whom might be reading 15 proposals. Ideally, they'll space that out over a few months before the review panel. You can't guarantee that they won't be trying to read all 15 the night before or on the plane on the way there. And then when it gets to the panel, your proposal might be discussed for as little as 10 minutes, okay? And so what that means is it's not someone in the evening with their feet up having as much time as they want to devote to your proposal and saying, ah, yes, this is good. How about $150,000? You want to picture a table of slightly frantic, frazzled people saying, is this the one that was going to do this? Flip, 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 flip. Okay? Or, I thought they said something about this and their broader impacts. Flip, 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 flip. So make it easy for someone who kind of half remembers something about your proposal to be able to find it, go back and see it. So organize it well. You know, they'll often tell you have these sections. You can have subsections and italicize them, you know. Organize, organize, organize. Thesis sentence. So good section, subsection heading, so that if they're saying, was this the proposal that was going to, wait, what was this one's broader impacts? I remember the research part, but I don't remember what they were doing for broader impacts. Make it easy to find. Numbered lists, you know. That is actually the, you know, as much as I kind of roll my eyes at some of the like figures that are just like, here's our plan in diagram form, that can be helpful for a memory thing and also flip and find it on the page. Like that's the page that laid this out. So definitely think about navigation and how people are going to find the important bits of information in a discussion. If they're advocating for you, if someone's saying, you know, I think they're going to have this problem and I don't think they talked about how they're going to address it. You know, make it easy for someone to say, no, they did that here. You know, clear sentences, clear organization. Like I said, imagine someone flipping through trying to find something in a hurry. So, organize, organize, organize. That's kind of all I had for the big kind of tips and tricks. Oh, I guess I should say questions about that. You know, that's going to be different depending on your project, depending on the proposal, but.
Can you show them the sponsor programs page
Absolutely.
with the forms and information specifically related to NSF?
I guess I have a question on that.
Go ahead.
This is just a question on your experience. Like among all those experiences the times when you served on the review board, do they actually print out the paper, the proposal? How many, like, do they print out the proposal? If they do they print out in color? I mean, this is a very specific one, but I'm just curious.
That's a good question.
I actually have not served on an NSF review panel.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times nowadays they're on computers and iPads.
Okay.
So you should kind of picture it reviewing through. However, a lot of the people on the review panel are more senior. And so I would definitely not do something that has to be in color. That like if you print it out, it's going to look awful if you print out grayscale.
All right. Yeah, good point. Yes.
So I would think about if it gets printed grayscale, is it still going to be legible? Is it still going to be readable?
Mm-hmm.
So what about internal grants? Like, do we have to submit those as well to Office of Sponsored Programs?
No, generally not. So this
Do
is
you
the
know any internal grant?
internal grants are generally run through your college or department. So I would talk to your AUH dean. There are faculty senate mini grants that are university-wide. There are also a few opportunities, what's the one that's run?
For VA.
For VA, and that one you have to partner with another Virginia public institution on.
Yeah, that's that I just passed recently.
Yeah, since that's internal, my office helps with external funding, so
Oh,
we don't really pay attention to the internal stuff, but it is around, and that you can use as seed funding. Again, to start getting some undergraduates working in your lab to build that preliminary data or that track record that you need to kind of get there. This is the Office of Sponsored Programs page. Okay. They're wonderful people, but they're not necessarily the most organized web page. I say that with great love for the great work that they do there. I'll show two things. Frequently required information. This is where you can find some of the information for the grant. Okay. But I find general FAQs has a lot of stuff here, including, so if you're submitting to NSF, we prefer that you use research.gov. Okay. So here's some information about the electronic systems. In particular, for NSF, you need to create a login for research.gov and you need to connect that to JMU. Okay. So they see what you're putting in there and they're able to sign off on it and hit the actual submit button. If you have problems doing that from within research.gov, just reach out to OSP. They're grants@jmu.edu, and they will help you set up the account. They will help you link it if you have any questions there. They also have some forms guide and resources here. Here are some of the JMU internal forms. Right now, if you want to submit a grant, you have to go through this internal approval form to make sure your AUH and Dean know about it, basically 2 levels up. If you're requesting course release, they want to make sure your AUH knows and is on board with that. They don't want to get money and then have you going to the AUH saying, I'm not teaching next semester, and your AUH being like, no one told me. This system is changing. We're going to be rolling out Cayuse in place of this internal approval form, depending on your unit next month or in the summer. Then there are a variety of forms that you need in different cases. Okay, so if you're requesting overload pay, this is one of the most common forms that you need. If you are requesting, say, graduate research assistant, this is how you put in a tuition application there. The other one that comes up a lot is subrecipients. We have a lot of partnerships with external entities, okay? So these are 3 forms that you need if you have a subrecipient that you're working with. If JMU is a subrecipient, reach out to OSP to kind of work with how that will work.
so what is subrecipient?
So let's say that you have, you're going to collaborate with someone at another university.
Okay.
We'll say Penn State. Okay. The NSF, there are 2 options for how you can do that. You can do a collaborative proposal, okay, where you kind of each submit parts of it, but since it's collaborative, some parts only one person submits. Okay. The other option, though, that's often easier is for one person to be a subrecipient. So you put together one grant, and all of the money would come to, say, JMU. But then you're going to say this $50,000 is going to then go to Penn State for them to do their work there. Okay. Instead of NSF giving some amount to JMU and then some amount to Penn State. Okay. And so in that case, Penn State is a subrecipient in the grant. Okay. Where JMU is going to give them money from the grant. Okay. And so there are forms that have to be filled out internally for JMU to process it and at the pre-proposal stage to make sure that Penn State is signing off on it, to make sure that they are a subrecipient versus a contractor, that they're committed to doing the work, so on and so forth. I will say usually when there's a sub-recipient, their Office of Sponsored Programs needs to sign off on it. JMU is going to ask for the signature of their authorized organizational representative typically. And they typically have a 5 business day requirement. So that means you might actually need to finish your proposal writing 2 weeks, 10 business days in advance. 5 business days go to their authorized organizational representative figuring it out. And then we need all those forms in 5 days before the deadline here.
Also, like this overload form, like what makes you, I mean, how is it decided that it's an overload and it's not an overload?
I would talk to sponsored programs. They are really the expert in that.
Okay.
When it comes to budgetary information, when do you need these forms, they are the absolute experts. So I could kind of give rules of thumb, but when you write to them, and as soon as you kind of know that you're applying for a grant, I would go ahead and get in touch with them. They assign you a specialist who will work with you for your budget. So you will be told this person is your specialist to work with you through this grant.
And you want to give them as far ahead notice as you possibly can that you're going to be submitting a grant in the future. A couple of months is good for them to know so that they can get it on their schedule. A common example of an external contractor is a person from the outside who does your assessment and evaluation for your grant project. Just so you know that that's a very common way to have to include a line item on your budget for a contractor.
So there are all sorts of resources here. I'll just mention what is in here. And kind of the backups. So I kind of talked about sign up for research.gov early. Do recommend, like I said, sign up to be on a review panel if you can. It is eye-opening in terms of what does it actually look like when people are sitting down evaluating your grant and what are the concerns.
For that, you just send an email to the program officer, right?
Yep, pretty much. So I would identify the programs of interest, email the program officer, tell them why you're emailing them. I would recommend attaching a CV, just so that they know who you are and why. And kind of saying your areas of expertise, because some of them have review panels for the program on more specific areas. So, and of course, you can't review your own grant. Some other tips that are in here. Look at what was funded in the past, especially for ones that don't have a solicitation. It can be helpful to look at what was funded in the past. You can go overboard with that. You can try and remember every program funds a variety of research, so you can try and say what is the exact perfect match for what was funded in the past. But I do recommend taking a look, especially if there's no solicitation, that can kind of give you a view of the breadth of what they've looked at in the past. And every single NSF program has that information on their page. So if you come back to here, you can browse projects funded by this. Okay. And it brings up everything that's been awarded here. So unless it's a brand new program that hasn't made awards before, you can go through and kind of just see which ones have been funded in the past. And if you click on each one, it'll bring up their abstract, along with some information about how much they were awarded. You can also see the program officer, program manager, in case you're trying to figure out who to reach out to. Although that is generally on this page as program contacts. And then the last one, especially given the uncertainty right now in the federal executive orders, remember to think broad for broader impacts. I know we're over time, so I don't want to keep you, so.
Okay. So when you say think broad for broader impacts, can you give an example? What do you mean?
Sure, so if you look at the broader impacts page for NSF, okay, and the NSF even says these are not exclusive, but they give 9 example outcomes. So a lot of times people think of broadening participation, which goes under that first one of inclusion, but there are all sorts of other types of broader impacts here. Partnerships, STEM workforce, infrastructure, economic competitiveness, national security, societal well-being, STEM education, public education. And so when you're thinking about broader impacts, I think a lot of people have historically focused on broadening participation, which is great. I'm not saying broadening participation is bad, but there are all these other different types of broader impacts you can have and connect to. You can say, I'm training my students in this lab to have these skills, and that's going to impact STEM workforce. And that's going to impact economic competitiveness. And maybe that's going to impact national security. You can say, you know, as part of my research, I am working with businesses, and so here's partnership. Here is, you know, societal well-being, dependent, you know, this research that I'm doing is going to help X, Y, and Z be more efficient, and that's going to make things better for everyone.
Yeah, and I think especially the number 2, the STEM education is something we as R2 can really talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so, and the other thing is the NSF itself. The NSF has 5 tips for broader impacts. Says, there's a common misconception among applicants that broader impact activities must be a separate add-on to the research activities, but that is not necessarily the case, okay? So, depending on your research project, go back to that infrastructure. You know, if you're saying, hey, I've got a better idea for a bridge, I've got an economist on board, I've got community partners, and we're going to go out and build this bridge and show that it's better, that can be your broader impact. You don't necessarily need to have extra activities. You know, so they say broader impacts can be accomplished through the research itself, through activities that are directly related to specific research projects, or through activities that are supported by but complementary to the project. So if you are, I don't know, say a researcher who works on arcane questions in early universe cosmology, and you're not very good at saying how that's going to actually affect anyone's life, you might have these complementary projects, okay, where you're going to say, well, I'm going to go out and talk to the people in the community and hold these public events, or I'm going to teach students these skills. Another thing from those 5 tips is they are looking to connect to community needs. I think that's something that can get lost in broader impacts as people think about, well, what can I do or what do I want to do? You'll strengthen it a lot if you say, here's a need. So I'm going into elementary schools and doing this activity with elementary school teachers, and here I've got a letter from an elementary school teacher saying that, like, this is what we need. Now, NSF letters of support often have to take a specific format, but if you can kind of say, like, I don't know, based on test scores, our students are doing poorly on the 4th grade math test. So this is a need for us to go in and do this. So connecting to community needs, if you can show that, that's pretty good. And then again, partnerships, especially for broader impacts. If that's not your strength, find a partner. Because the criteria, you can look up the criteria for broader impacts, and 5 of the criteria, one is how well qualifies the individual team or institution, okay? If you're proposing some, you know, curriculum development for elementary school and you've got no background there, find a partner in the College of Ed, or find partners in the Harrisonburg School District. So they're not saying, you don't know anything about early elementary ed. Another question is, are there adequate resources available to the PI? And it actually says in the evaluation criteria, either at the home institution or through collaborations to carry out the proposed activities. You know, so if you're struggling to say, I want to do this, but I don't know if I have the resources, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate.